Question 1, please.
Minister.
I've not had discussions with the Minister for Infrastructure in relation to sufficient school provision in central Craigavon. An examination of the Armagh Band Bridge in Craigavon local government district, where central Craigavon is located, shows that there were 3,368 available places at primary schools and 1,161 available places at post-primary schools. The Education Authority has statutory responsibility for the planning of education provision, which is sufficient and efficient to meet the needs of all children and young people in an area. The EA Area Planning Team has examined this area and has reported for primary schools overall there are available places in all sectors with the exception of the grant-maintained integrated. There are limited places available at post-primary level, however, the demand for Year 8 places within the time frame of the Strategic Area Plan covering the period of 2022 to 27 will decline. Where pressure on school places does arise, my department is able to respond to that pressure by use of the temporary variation procedure. Any school that is oversubscribed can request additional places through a temporary variation, and if there is a shortfall of provision in that sector and that area, additional places will be allocated. This ensures the school admission system can flex and respond to demand as and when it arises.
Mr. Beattie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Minister, and can I thank the Minister's team for winkling out the answer to that question, which wasn't very well worded for myself, so thank you for that. I suppose the point I'm making, Minister, is in central Craigavon, there's an awful lot of private houses now being built, and there's a real concern that we do not have the school provisions if it continues at the rate that it's going at this moment in time. And if you look at the likes of Portadown College, which is getting a new build, the Portadown Integrated Primary and Craigavon Senior High School,
Question, Mr. Beattie.
and Craigavon Senior High School, and they need extra space. Could I just ask the Minister if they will review the builds to give them that extra space?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the citing of housing developments is one area where schools will make the case for a need for a change in the enrolment figures, and that is often a case for change that can come through. And that would be reflected in any reports that would come to me. If there is new housing developments, what would that mean for an increase in the birth rate and potential pressures then on schools? But housing developments in and of itself wouldn't necessarily translate into an evidence of the need that is required for schools. But I think I've outlined, Mr. Speaker, the flexible nature in the way in which we would approach these matters as a need would arise.
Cara Hunter.
I thank the Minister for his answers so far. Minister, can I ask, off the back of Mr. Beattie's question, what role does your department and or the EA play in discussing with councils the formation of local development plans? And the reason I ask is there's a fantastic new school of Millstrand in Portrush that has been built, but there is ongoing road safety concerns due to this being a built-up area. Thank
Minister.
you.
Well, the department, Mr. Speaker, does not engage with other departments to determine which schools would necessarily be announced in that respect. But whenever it comes to taking into account local development plans, that's something that the council can certainly engage with the EA on and the department. And where that request would come forward, it would be expected that EA would participate in that.
Dan Dodds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I thank the Minister, because I do think this is an important issue. One of the ways, so far we've only discussed the issue of new builds and capacity within schools, but one of the issues that his department takes up and is doing very well on is the school enhancement programme, which not only creates capacity but also enhances facilities. Will the Minister try to ensure that the EA respond to the business cases for school enhancement programmes in a more appropriate manner than they have done? And I think in particular of Carrick Primary School in Lurgan, where the process of getting the school enhancement programme has gone on for many, many years.
Okay, we'll get to this. Minister.
There is a valid point in terms of the processes around the school enhancement programme that the member raises. Obviously, you have your minor works schemes, then you will have your school enhancement programme, and then you'll have new capital builds. and it is an area of concern that I have raised about the length of time it can take to go through that process. So that is something that the Department's actively engaging with the EA on to try and establish, is there a better way to take forward school enhancement programme processes.
I call Mr. Harvey.
Speaker, question 2, please.
Minister.
Major refurbishment projects are assessed through the School Enhancement Programme, which targets investment to address immediate and pressing accommodation needs in schools. The second call to the School Enhancement Programme closed for applications from school managing authorities in February 2017. The applications were assessed against key criteria such as rationalisation, suitability, condition and the percentage of pupils with special educational needs and allocated free school meals. The selection criteria will be reviewed in advance of any future calls for the SEP programme. Minor refurbishment projects, typically up to £1 million, are considered through the Minor Works scheme. Unfortunately, the demand for investment far exceeds the budget available, so difficult decisions have been required to prioritise works to keep schools open, pupils safe and to provide education access for the most vulnerable. Many schools across the estate are in urgent need of investment, and I am delighted to have progressed 7 SEP projects to procurement earlier this year. Unfortunately, the number of projects that I am able to progress is restricted due to the challenging budget position and SEN placements. I can assure you, Mr. Speaker, that I'll continue to make the case for increased investment in the education estate to allow much needed projects to be delivered.
Mr. Harvey.
Speaker, thank you, Minister. Minister, how can a school apply for a minor works for refurbishment?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the number of schools that I've visited have highlighted minor work schemes that are necessary, and presently where we are trying to meet the need is around that inescapable statutory requirement around health and safety, fire protection or other statutory obligations around disability discrimination acts. So that's where you would approach the EA for an unavoidable minor works application, and they would then take the school through that process. I very much want to get to a place where we can deliver so much more by way of the refurbishment and enhancement of our school estate. That's why I continue to put forward comprehensive bids as part of the financial monitoring round process within the executive, and I trust that all colleagues in the Assembly will support me in the case being made for further investment in education.
Steve Aiken.
I thank the Minister for his remarks so far, and may I make a declaration of interest as a school governor for Kilbride Central Primary School. Minister, is there any advice you could give to school governors, particularly of schools that are stuck on the SEB programme, how we manage to navigate ourselves through the Kafkaesque approach that the EA seems to be developing, and every time we try to have a conversation about a business case? Thank you.
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, whenever a school has been successful in that SEP programme, you can then advance those schools into the ICT scheme, the integrated design type process. That's when you appoint your architect, and the professional support is put around that team to try and advance it. So I understand the frustration that for some schools they were announced as part of the SEP programme, but they haven't been able to advance. Once you are able to advance into that next phase, you then can make progress, and I want those schools to get to the point where at least they're at that pre-tender stage where the design work's completed, the feasibility studies have been carried out, a business case has been approved. But the member is right, the process I think takes too long, and it obviously leads to frustration. That's why I'm wanting the Department and EA to look at that process to see how it can be improved.
Donny Donnelly.
And thank the Minister for his comments so far. I noted the Minister mentioned that the key criteria are to be reviewed before the next round of projects. I wonder if he would be able to tell us when the last review of the eligibility criteria was. Thank you.
I think the previous answer referred to 2017, whenever there was a scheme. As things currently stand, I'm not in a place where I can make another call on schools to come forward for either a school enhancement programme or, for that matter, a new capital build. There are so many that are currently awaiting that it amounts to billions of pounds would be needed to deal with those who have already got approval for a new build or indeed for a school enhancement programme. So as things currently stand in the near future, I don't have any intention to open up a call for either SEPs or for new capital bills. If that changes, obviously then I would look at what criteria would be used in carrying out any assessment for those schools that would come forward, but there is no immediate plans for a call to be made in these areas.
No McAleer.
Number 3, question 3, please.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. On the 18th of July this year, the Northern Ireland Executive agreed that the Strual Shared Education Campus should proceed immediately to contract award and for investment of £375 million on the programme. The main works construction contract was signed on the 7th of August this year, and I'm delighted to confirm that the programme is progressing at pace, and my officials are fully engaging with all of the stakeholders around every aspect of delivery. On the current programme timetable, following the pre-construction design period, campus construction is due to begin on-site in early 2025, with the full campus opening being planned for September of 2028.
Mr McAleer.
I thank the Minister for his reply and welcome the timeline here. Minister, you'll also be aware that when the schools relocate to the campus, there'll be a number of vacated sites in the town centre, which will be very strategically important to the development of Omagh. Has your department been engaging with fellow stakeholders as to how we could maximise opportunities of those sites?
Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, when it comes to any vacant sites that then will come about as a result of that, that will be a matter for those who own those sites and the various different bodies that make that up to discuss could there be another alternative use for it in terms of education or indeed for wider public service, or is it something that then is disposed of. So that will be a process for those who legally own them at that time to decide will there be any way in which they can be either repurposed or disposed of. At this stage, I haven't been involved in my department in any of those conversations.
David Dunn.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I ask the Minister what is the latest position regarding those schools announced under the Fresh Start scheme?
Minister.
Of the announced Fresh Start projects, 8 have now been completed, with a further 6 currently in construction. And the member will know that, unfortunately, earmarked Fresh Start funding was removed by the Labour government and the previous Conservative government. Ring-fence funding is therefore no longer in place for the planning and construction of any of the remaining 10 Fresh Start projects that are not currently in construction contract. But what I have been able to do is place these remaining unfunded Fresh Start projects into my department's executive-funded major capital works programme, and that would allow the projects to continue to advance in planning and design.
Orig Largate.
Question 4.
Mr Speaker, I've made funding available to progress the School Enhancement Programme project for Holy Child Primary School through the design stages to pre-tender stage. A decision to release the tender will be taken on a case-by-case basis, dependent on budget availability at that time, and I'll continue to make the case for additional capital funding for education through the Executive.
Mr DeLargate.
Minister, thank you for your answers, and I appreciate you've already dealt with SEP in quite a lot of detail here today. I should declare an interest as a member of the Board of Governors and as a former teacher in Holy Child School as well. But as part of that Board of Governors, we condemned several huts this summer and before because of black mould. This is something which I think many of your colleagues have touched on, but it's around how quickly EA react to that. So if you could provide me with any more detail on that, it would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I commend the member for continuing to serve on the Board of Governors. I think it's important that elected reps, where they can, are able to do that because they can add value to the school that they're serving. It's highlighted the SEP process for this particular school. The tender process has begun for the appointment of an integrated consultancy team, and they will then take the project through that design and construction phases of the project, and the ICT will be appointed before the end of this financial year. The member highlighted a number of areas where they're continuing to work with EA to try and address some of those issues. If there's anything in particular, I'd be happy to look at that particular matter for the member's behalf with EA directly.
Mark Durgan.
Thank the Minister for his answers thus far and what sounds like progress to something that was initially announced in January 2020. of course, we've had that was one of the first announcements post a 3-year collapse, and we've had a subsequent 2-year collapse. Given that delay is the biggest driver of cost, will the Minister acknowledge that the political paralysis that's become all too familiar here has cost our public services, our education system, and is costing our children dear?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I very much want to make sure that this executive is able to deliver on all of the key issues facing the citizens that we serve. And over the past 8 months, I think there's clear evidence that we have been able to do that. I cite, for the members' benefit, the early learning and childcare strategy. We're already this month now, after a full month of it being implemented, over £2 million have went into the pockets of hard-working family. That's a sign that this executive, I brought the scheme forward, the Finance Minister and colleagues supported me to do that, and we're taking action. I also announced major capital spend in terms of a new strategy for special educational needs. We announced new capital bills. So we are making progress on a whole range of areas, and I trust that that will be the case in the future. But I say to the member, in the past, this Assembly, it didn't operate the way that it should, and there were multiple occasions under the SDLP and the Ulster Unionist Party whenever this Assembly collapsed.
Matthew O'Toole.
Question 5, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, since taking up office, I've received invitations to meet with schools, individuals and many organisations. I've accepted 324 of them and fulfilled hundreds of these, including visits to many schools and community facilities that represent every part of our society. Given the significant demands in my diary, it would not be possible to accommodate every request.
Minister, in response to what you didn't say in that answer, is in response to a colleague of mine, Councillor DeFici, you've indicated the large number of organisations who have been declined meetings. What would you say to those meetings, many of them charities, organisations that are legally registered with the Charities Commission, Companies House and all sorts of other legal routes? What would you say to them who are startled to see you decline meetings with them but accept meetings with an umbrella group linked to paramilitary organisations?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've highlighted in responding to the question, I've accepted 324 invitations. I've discharged hundreds of those requests. I have been in countless number of schools, community facilities, representing every section of our society and every sector within education. I think if members put in the question to every other minister, I'd be interested to see how many invites and meetings they have attended to see how I can compare against their record, and that's maybe something that colleagues will do. But I will not make any apology for making sure that we seek to move every part of our society forward. And unlike his previous leader, the late John Hume, I do have concern and share some of the concerns that people have been expressed. But when John Hume embraced Gerry Adams and Sinn Féin, when the IRA were up to their neck in murdering people of our country, John Hume's response was, I don't give two balls of roasted snow what you think. I, however, do have concern, and I share those concerns, but I'll continue to work in every community to bring them forward.
Nick Matheson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister provide an assessment of the extent to which he considers that the LCC represents the views of proscribed unlawful paramilitary organisations, and on that basis explain the rationale as to why it was appropriate to hear their views in relation to education policy?
Sir.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think every part of our society has to be able to move forward. I've often said that because you have had a past doesn't mean that you shouldn't have a future. And some of the very people that you're being critical, or some are being critical that I met with, my family locked up day after day in the Maze prison, served in the H blocks, shot at going to work. My uncle took 13 bullets as he drove down the motorway. My father served in both Loyalist and Republican wings. The Alliance Party and others here campaigned vociferously to get them all released. I campaigned against the Belfast Agreement. But now having the Alliance Party and others champion the early release of mass murderers into our society, they criticise and have the cheek to criticise me for wanting to move our society forward. I'll not be lectured by those who are acting in a very hypocritical fashion on this issue.
Jonathan Buckley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Minister, there are members in this chamber who believe that just because they are now elected representatives, that their heinous terrorist acts and convictions are in some way justified. History would record that the Nazis had a similar ideology. So can I ask the Minister, what work, and getting back to the substance of the issue, what work is being done to support working class Protestant boys who continue to feel the worst impact of social deprivation and educational underachievement in Northern Ireland?
Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for his question, because I was shocked when I heard Pat Sheehan justify the heinous acts of the Provisional IRA on the basis that he now has an electoral mandate. The electoral mandate does not change the fact that Pat Sheehan was a convicted terrorist for a prescribed organisation, and they will not be viewed, and those who participated will not be viewed in any other way just because they managed to get votes to get elected into this House, compared to other loyalists that they now criticise me in whenever it comes to meeting. When it comes to supporting working class Protestant boys, there's a significant amount of support that's already available to help address underachievement amongst working class Protestant boys. I refer the member to targeting social need, which accounts for approximately £75 million. I also then safeguarded the extended schools budget this year to maintain funding of £8 million, and that assists 450 eligible schools. And then we have Fair Start programmes. Many of these programmes benefit everybody, irrespective of their religious background, and that's the right thing to do. And later this week, I'll be officially announcing the RAISE programme, which again is about trying to address that educational underachievement, which exists in many of our working class communities, but is particularly acute in those from a loyalist Protestant background.
Philip Brett. Minister.
A task force has been commissioned to progress this important work. In the pursuit of consistency and equity of support, the task force held its first meeting on Friday, the 27th of September. It is chaired by the Chief Executive of the CSSC and includes senior representation from the Department of Education and the Education Authority. The task force will develop a proposed model for controlled school support, including a dedicated body to include managing authority responsibility. The task force is due to report back to me by December of this year, and I'll be in a position to provide a further update to the House in due course.
Mr. Brett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Minister for his update on this really important work. Would the Minister agree with me that it shows his commitment, and indeed our party's commitment, to ensure that all educational sectors in Northern Ireland are treated equally and have the same representations across the board that they rightly deserve?
Well, can I thank the member for those comments, because it isn't just my view that there needs to be this support for the controlled sector. It comes from the Independent Review of Education, where they also made this recommendation, and there was an evidence base for that. And one of the comments that was highlighted in that report was that the managing authority role has always been a challenge, because the EA also provides a wide range of services to all other schools. This results in complicated systems for school management, which are in particular suboptimal for the controlled sector. And the Independent Review of Education also referenced what was then a recent landscape review of the EA, and that landscape review also produced similar findings and highlighted many of the same failings for the controlled sector, which the Independent Review of Education also highlighted and made recommendations upon.
Mr. Speaker, to ask the Minister if he acknowledges that he's actually going against the recommendation of the Independent Review of Education in establishing yet another management authority in Northern Ireland rather than setting up a single management authority.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, no I don't, but it's interesting that the Alliance Party seem to now be positioning themselves against the control sector, but they brought through an Integrated Education Act to give preferential treatment to one sector. What I am after is equity for all of our sectors. That's why I'm supporting this proposal and asking for this task force to report to me by the end of the year.
Colin McGrath.
Sorry? Question number 7.
Sorry, I didn't realise I had a question.
Mr Speaker, it is for the Education Authority to determine what measures can be taken to improve the management of school transport at the start of the year. However, my department is committed to supporting the EA in delivering those improvements. The EA is currently developing a smart transport project which will digitise key transport functions such as route planning and introduce other digital solutions, enabling it to have visibility of all services travelling to a school. This will allow the EA to better optimise the school transport network, deliver efficiencies and improve the information available to parents about transport arrangements. Transport assistance is provided to over 90,000 pupils travelling to and from school each day, of which around 10,000 have an additional transport requirement detailed in their statement of special educational need. The number of children with a statement of SEN requiring bespoke transport arrangements continues to increase. The EA can only start arranging transport once a school placement has been confirmed, and this can present operational challenges in the management of transport provision at the start of the school year, especially in relation to taxi transport. As a potential enhancement of the current model, the EA is piloting a 7-seater vehicle within its own fleet to determine if this affords flexibility in the delivery of transport for pupils who need more bespoke arrangements and would help minimise disruption and delays at the start of the school year.
Mr McGrath.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Minister for working so diligently and quickly through his questions. Could I ask, would the Minister not agree that the principals of schools do know pretty much from the beginning of one year what they're going to require in the following year, and that there should be a procedure for EA to be able to interact with school principals much earlier to determine what needs there are, rather than waiting until the beginning of September to see problems?
Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, I like to facilitate everybody in asking their questions and engaging with me. The member is right in terms of that sharing of information. That's why this digital scheme actually will be helpful, because it will help capture that data and make it more readily available to those who are involved in taking those decisions. So part of that, say, an end-to-end review around special educational needs is about looking at the current processes that are involved, making it more streamlined, sharing of information, and all of that should help make these decisions more speedily and effective, because I do recognise it has not been what it should be in some cases when it came to September. Part of that has been as a result of the process by way you have a placement secured and then you seek to put in the transport arrangements, and in some cases that has required new provision, access NI checks, and all of that has led to a delay in some cases, which I think is regrettable, but we do need to find better ways to improve that process.
Bobby Butler.
Speaker, thank the Minister for his update and the news of a new digital solution. But I don't think the digital solution will reach into the policy failures here. This is a draconian policy around transport. We see failures every year, particularly around transfer tests, when parents are having to opt for schools that don't comply with the policy, and also issues like bullying, where young people are having to attend other schools other than the one closest. Can the Minister give a commitment to a full and fundamental review and reform of the transport policy?
Well, the policy is underpinned by legislation in many respects, and where there is a full review that should take place, and some members have advocated for this, it may require legislative change, but I am keen to look at transport in its totality. The department spends approximately £120 million a year, so that is a significant amount of funding. Some colleagues would advocate that the current 2-mile distance for primary and 3-mile distance for secondary schools is too restrictive and would like to see that more accessible. That would have a very clear funding challenge, and our transport policy underpins the plurality of choice of type of school. And so if we were to look at that in its comprehensive sense, then it may lead to changes which could require legislation. But I do think we have to look at this, because it's about providing the service at the right place for pupils, but it's also an issue when it comes to the increased level of expenditure. From the public perspective, we need to be satisfied that that money is being well spent and can be justified.
Emma Sheeran.
Little Hall, question 8, please.
Minister.
A review of the home-to-school transport policy commenced in 2018. However, it was paused by the then Minister due to the pandemic and further suspended pending the outcome of the independent review of education. It is important to note that the transport policy supports other policies within the department, such as parental preference and special educational needs. Work is progressing on the end-to-end review of SEN, and work is already underway on an action plan arising from the EA's landscape review to include detailed consideration of the operational delivery of services such as school transport. Any review of the home-to-school transport policy should complement and build on the outcomes from all of these work streams, and it's in this context that I will consider the utility and timing of a new separate review of the transport policy.
Time is up for questions to the Minister. I must commend the Minister on his speed reading that he's learned since he became Education Minister. So it's good he's learning something. And we move to topical questions. I call Cara Hunter.
Minister, it's been great to see parents avail of the NI Childcare Subsidy Scheme announced in May of this year, but in a recent answer it indicated that the childcare strategy may have been paused while this scheme was being developed. Is this the case? And has there been any work since then on a longer-term strategy?
Minister.
I can assure the member there has not been any pausing of the development of the childcare strategy. What we did do was prioritise the establishment of the Northern Ireland Childcare Subsidy Scheme. I think that was important that we set that up, and I have to say it has been rolled out across Northern Ireland incredibly well. The Early Years Organisation is who the Department commissioned to carry out this work for us, and the uptake, I think, demonstrates the very efficient manner in which the Childcare Subsidy Scheme has delivered, and that 15% in addition to the 20% tax-free childcare allowance has proven to be the right model upon which we have based that scheme. But we also have been taking forward other aspects, including identifying what preschool provision could move to that standardised response of full-time as opposed to just part-time. And that's something that we are developing, and I would hope that we would be in a position in due course to announce what 100 settings are able to move towards that full-time provision. We are also using the information that has been gathered from the Childcare Subsidy Scheme to inform all of the work that will be taking place to develop that comprehensive strategy.
Ms. Hunter.
Thank you, Minister, for your detailed answer. Just off the back of that then, we know that every day parents across our constituencies are paying what is almost like a second mortgage for childcare. Can I ask then, do you have a rough timeline of when we can anticipate the childcare strategy coming forward? Thank you.
Minister. The childcare strategy will take, I would say, a number of years to get the final comprehensive strategy in place, and I think my engagement with the stakeholders have indicated they want it to be comprehensive, detailed, as we seek to develop that. But that has not prevented us as an executive from taking forward measures around the childcare subsidy scheme, including then the standardisation of that preschool provision towards full-time places. And where we can do more, then I'll want to do more. But the development of that strategy, we need to get right, engaging with as many different organisations as we can, so that will shape the totality of that comprehensive scheme whenever it comes forward by way of the strategy.
Question 2 and 5 are withdrawn. I call Trevor Clark.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Following on from the previous question, I suppose, and commend you, Minister, for the rollout of that £25 million package. Can you indicate how much of that package has still outstanding to roll out?
Well, the Executive agreed £25 million to be allocated towards that, and we have been drawing that down from September, October of this year. Obviously, if you apply that for a full financial year, the current provision that you would need would be in the ballpark of around £50 million to do what we're currently doing. But we need to build upon that, and so that's why, as we develop the scheme, I'll continue to put forward the proposals to the Executive as to what further funding would be necessary to build upon the work that we've started.
Mr. Clark.
Can I thank the Minister for that question, and appreciate, Minister, that you have a very family-centred approach in terms of the rollout of this. Can you indicate actually how many families, and in terms of real numbers of many families, have actually benefited to date of this programme?
Mr. Clark, or Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as of the 7th of October, 12,966 children and 1,524 providers have been registered for the scheme, with the first payments being made to bills in September, just last month. So in September, the scheme alone saved parents almost £1 million in their childcare bills, and then you had the additional £1.1 million of savings that was drawn down through the tax-free childcare allowance through Westminster. So I think that's a demonstration of how this Executive and this department is actually making a real impact. And I know from speaking to those families, they've greatly appreciated the support because they are finding it difficult. And I've also had feedback that has indicated for some of those families, they have been able to increase the number of hours that they are working, because that is a key component underpinning this scheme, that it isn't just about helping to meet the costs of childcare, but it is also to act as an enabler, often in most cases women, to be able to re-engage in the workforce or to do more through their employment, and I've had some evidence that suggests that is happening.
Minister, further to previous commitments in the last question time, could you please provide an update with any engagement you've had with the Health Minister in relation to nursing provision in special schools?
Minister. Yes, I had a very helpful meeting organised by Michelle Guy and Nick Matheson and a number of principals, where we talked through all of the issues that are impacting in our special schools, particularly that concern about potential withdrawal of nurses, but also some of the changes that we've had with allied health professionals withdrawing from these settings. On the back of that meeting, I have been corresponding with the Health Minister, and I believe we also have a date for a meeting to take place again with Nick, Michelle, the principals and the Health Minister and myself to go through these issues together.
Thank you. Minister, would you commit to working with the Health Minister to instigate a review of the current level of nursing provision in special schools to ensure all students are receiving safe and appropriate medical care?
Mr. Speaker, the member rightly highlights the collaborative nature by which departments need to operate in order to meet the needs of the children and young people who are in our special schools. And we won't be able to provide an education for those children and young people if we don't have the appropriate professional support from the Department of Health and the trusts. So it is critical that there is support put in place. Very clear concern is being raised by the teaching professionals and principals that the withdrawal of services is already having an impact in terms of the educational potential for those children and young people. And I was particularly struck in one of the schools that I visited, where the only way in which the child is able to be in the school is because her parent or grandparent is coming and staying in an annex beside her classroom for 3 to 4 hours a day. Otherwise, that child wouldn't be allowed to come into the school because of the complex medical needs that exists, and that there isn't that provision being provided by the Health Trust. I don't think that's satisfactory, far from it, but I do need the Department of Health to step up and help me in this.
Keith Buchanan.
Thank you, Mr. Minister, indicate what contact he has had with His Majesty's Treasury in relation to the issue of VAT on independent schools.
Minister. A number of months ago, the Minister in the Treasury, James Murray MP, asked to engage with me as a result of the Labour Party's election manifesto commitment that they would be applying VAT to private schools. We had that engagement. I outlined my opposition to what was being proposed, and we've continued to engage with my officials and his officials, and I met again with James Murray on the 7th of October to highlight my concerns again. We have made some progress in respect of VAT exemption in examples of Group A voluntary grammar schools, but we continue to have issues around Group B voluntary grammar schools and also those grammar schools that have preps, and it also has a negative impact on those independent schools in Northern Ireland, and we continue to make the case on their behalf.
Mr. Buchanan.
Minister, so what is the latest position as of today, and how many schools in Northern Ireland do you think this will affect?
Minister. Well, Treasury has advised that a change to the definition of a private school as set out in the draft legislation isn't required for some of the grammar schools that charge a capital fee of up to £140. There are 9 voluntary grammar schools which charge that capital fee, and they're not going to be in scope of this legislation. There are a further 12 schools with preps or boarding departments which may be in scope of the legislation, and my officials continue to present evidence that we believe should justify their exemption, and we're awaiting clarification from the Treasury on this particular matter.
Liz Kimmins.
The Scots Bragda scheme in our local primary schools is a fantastic opportunity for our children to learn Irish at the earliest possible stage, and with a growing demand for the scheme across the north, can the Minister provide an update on any plans around the funding for that? Thank you.
Minister.
Well, any funding issues, of course, are subject to what allocations I receive within the department, and education isn't funded to the level that we would all want it to be. That has implications when it comes to resource implications, but on the particular case that the member raises, I'm happy to write and provide any specific detail for that organisation.
Ms. Gimmons.
The Minister for his answer, and I suppose early engagement with a second language has really good benefits educationally, psychologically and for employment for children and young people. So can I ask the Minister then, as part of that, if budget allows in the future, would you consider reviewing the funding that's currently in place?
Sure.
Well, happy to look at any proposals. I've been particularly impressed whenever I visited a number of the Irish medium schools. The cognitive impact that it has whenever it comes to learning another language, that has a clear educational benefit. That's true of those who immerse themselves within the Irish medium and those who are learning other language. There's a clear correlation in terms of that cognitive ability when it comes to then other parts of the education. So I'm more than happy to support proposals that are going to have a positive impact. Again, I just come back to that point. The financial resources that my department needs are significant, and we're currently being underfunded.
Harvey.
Speaker. Minister, could you possibly provide us with an update on the consultation concerning the school uniforms, please? Thank you.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the consultation was launched in June, and it was to gather stakeholder views in areas such as the need for statutory guidance in relation to school uniforms, particularly around the cost and affordability of those uniforms, the use of branded items and sole supplier arrangements. That consultation closed on the 27th of September, and there was a large response, and I'm pleased to say that many people shared their views with us. There were just under 7,500 responses overall, and approximately 4,000 of those were from children and young people.
Mr. Harvey.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, when would you hope to be in a position to introduce legislation regarding school uniforms?
Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, I would be keen, when we have carried out our analysis of the consultation responses, to bring forward legislation in the coming months, so that the committee can get into its role of scrutinising that, and that the Assembly then can give its due consideration of the issue. So I would hope to bring forward legislation to my executive colleagues for their consideration within the next number of months.
Melissa McHugh.
The Minister will be aware of the challenges which face so many families when it comes to securing an assessment and diagnosis for autism for their child. Can the Minister outline what work is he doing with his counterpart in the Department of Health in terms of new strategies or plans that are being brought forward to ensure that these families can access services quicker so that they can get this vital diagnosis, so that from the educational perspective that the proper support can be provided to the young person?
Minister.
I met last week with the independent reviewer of autism, and we discussed these very issues in terms of how do we support families and the young people in particular, especially in that early intervention, because all of the evidence shows the sooner that you can intervene and provide that support, the better the outcome you're going to have. Part of the special educational needs end-to-end review has been looking at all of those issues. That review is coming to a conclusion, and I hope to be able to provide an update to the House around how we will take forward special educational needs transformation across all of the issues, including this area of autism.
Mr. McHugh.
Thank you, Minister, for your answer to this point. In fact, you nearly sort of read out my second question to you as well, too, in terms of early intervention. And can I ask you, Minister, if you can commit to making early intervention a real priority in terms of how the department approaches this area of special educational needs?
I think, Mr. Speaker, one of the key outworkings of the review that has been carrying place will be identifying how you can move those interventions to a much earlier stage. So I can assure the member I very much believe in early intervention. The challenge, I think, has always been how do you meet the current need whilst in then investing further upstream in terms of that earlier intervention. So we need to be able to do what we currently do, but we need that additional investment. That's why we have put forward a significant bid as part of the transformation, and the department's bid will be assessed in due course by the Transformation Board. But a key component of that bid is around special educational needs provision and how we can transform our approach to that.
We don't have time for further questions to the Minister for Education, so we move to the Minister of Finance, and I call Nick Matheson.
Mr.